Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman. I'm joined as always by John Kelly. We got a banger of a fight night going down this weekend in London. It is UFC Fight Night London. Clash of the heavyweights. We got Alexander Volkov versus Tom Aspinall in the main event. A bunch of British fighters littered throughout the card. Pretty strong offering for a fight night. We currently have 12 fights scheduled for Saturday night. We originally had 13 down to 12. We'll get into that a little bit before the first fight of the night. But before we get onto the fights, John, my friend, pretty exciting fight week this week. First international card since the beginning of the pandemic. I'm super excited for the card. How are you feeling going into this fight week?
Yeah, I'm feeling good, man. We got college basketball, which I know you are a big college basketball fan. This is like one of the best times of year. St. Patty's Day right around the corner. And then we have an awesome UFC card on Saturday with an early start time for us old heads at the 1 p.m. Eastern slot, which I absolutely love. So yeah, I'm definitely excited. Awesome week. My daughter actually turns 1 on Friday as well. So that just adds to how great this week is for me.
You love to see it. Happy birthday, of course, to Madison. We do have 12 fights I want to just touch on before we get into the first fight of the night. We were originally supposed to have Nathaniel Wood as a pretty significant favorite take on Vince Morales in the second fight of the evening. That fight has been reportedly canceled this afternoon. It was reported. Nobody, no super huge name reporter has confirmed the news, but from what it appears between other UFC fighters, I think Davey Grant put out a tweet. I think the goal is to keep Nathaniel Wood on the card. Vince Morales is out, so we won't discuss the fight, but I would assume that Nathaniel Wood is going to be a pretty decent sized favorite if he's able to stay on the card. I believe he's $8,900 on DraftKings. So that'll be something to monitor throughout the next few days. We are recording this on Wednesday night in America. Obviously, the weigh-ins will go down Friday in Europe, but we do have 12 fights to break down. A lot of big favorites on this card, so I think that'll kind of lead to some interesting discussion. I think it's tough to get excited about a lot of underdogs, at least from a DraftKings perspective, so we'll touch on all that strategy stuff throughout the show, but without much further ado, let's get started here on the first fight of the evening. We got Muhammad Mokayev. He is making his UFC debut this weekend as a pretty sizable -350 favorite. He's $9.1 thousand on DraftKings, and he takes on Cody Durden, who comes back plus 270 dogs, $7.1 thousand for Cody Durden in this matchup. And look, well, we can get started here hot off the presses. This is actually my first bet of the evening. I did bet Muhammad Mokayev. I laid the chalk here at -290. I bet it about a week ago. He's up to -350, so got a little bit ahead of a line move. But basically, this kid's only 6-0. He's 21 years old. A lot of people have kind of been considering him to be like green, but a pretty promising prospect. Actually, a guy who 23-0 in the amateur ranks, so certainly a young kid, but has a good amount of experience. I mean, he's got 6 professional fights. He's got 23 on the amateur scene. He's unbeaten. Really strong wrestler. I really like his single leg. He has gone to the double leg in a few of his fights as well. His striking game, is not, I don't think, anything that's like super above average, but he has some decent kicks. One thing I don't love about his game is he tends to move backwards into the cage a little bit. If you go back and watch his last fight against O'Driscoll, that was kind of an issue. Close first round where he backed himself into the cage. But really, he sets a pretty decent pace with his wrestling, has strong takedown defense, which I think will hold up against Cody Durden. And this is as much of a play on Mokayev, who, I think he's a good prospect. I'm not sure I think he's like champ material, but he's a young kid. I think he's going to win fights at the UFC level. My play here is mostly a fade on Cody Durden. Like, Cody Durden is about as empty a wrestler as it gets at the UFC level. I mean, this guy drew with Chris Gutierrez in his UFC debut, gets a 10-8 in round 1, drops the last 2 rounds, and then gets the flying triangle in Jimmy Flick's only fight, and then beats Iori Kulang in his last fight. And like, Cody Durden is just a guy who he has a wrestling background. I believe he wrestled in the state of Georgia, and he's a decent wrestler in terms of MMA offensively, but he doesn't have much cardio when he looks to wrestle. He's got like 7.5 to 10 minutes of solid offensive wrestling in his back pocket. And now we couple that with this matchup where I think Mokayev is going to force him to defensively wrestle and kind of defend single legs consistently throughout the fight and really turn it into like a grindy wrestling match. I really don't like Cody Durden's striking. Like I mentioned, I don't think Mokayev is a great striker, but I honestly think his kicking game is better than anything Cody Durden has to offer. He's been pretty outclassed at distance against everyone in the UFC he's fought outside of Jimmy Flick, who's a guy who I don't really think would outstrike pretty much anybody at this level. So honestly, I understand why some people are having some pause with a 21-year-old kid at a 3-1 price in this debut fight, first fight of the night. But honestly, man, I think Mokayev is the real deal. Not sure I'm going to label him top 5, top 10, but I don't think he needs to be that in order to win this fight. Just a kid who I think is a strong wrestling base. His striking looks okay, good cardio, and Cody Durden's a guy who I don't think is going to be super long for the UFC, just kind of an empty wrestler, and I think he doesn't even have the better wrestling in this fight, let alone the grappling, which is something I wanted to mention. Like, Mokayev, probably his best weapon is how easy he's able to take the back of his opponents, and he hasn't fought a super great level of competition, but even in his last fight where he struggled in round 1, took his opponent's back, took it again in round 2 when he choked him out. Pretty much every fight Mokayev has, he gets to his opponent's back at some point. And Cody Durden is a decent wrestler. I don't think his grappling or jiu-jitsu is really anywhere close to the level of Mokayev. So if they get in like scrambling situations, I expect Durden to have his back taken at some point in this fight. So I'd lay the chalk to win a unit and a half on Mokayev at minus 290. At minus 350, I think it's closer to a pass, but there might still be a little bit of value there if you're looking to lay chalk or look for a parlay piece this weekend, whatever it may be. So long-winded first opinion of the night for me, but Mokayev is my largest bet of the evening. Jon, am I crazy for laying this kind of price on a 21-year-old kid in his UFC debut?
No, I don't think so. I'm with you. I kind of think Cody Durden, he is what he is. Like, he has solid wrestling. He's got okay grappling. Like, I'll take him against lower level guys that can't defensively wrestle and grapple. But the dude does not have the cardio. It's not like his grappling is super high level anyway. And then it's like the wrestling isn't going to be there against Mokayev. Like, I think Makayev's a better grappler. He's from England, but he has that Dagestan background. I think he's the better grappler here. I think he has better cardio. I think he could land takedowns against Durden, and we've seen when he gets on top in the past, like, he has vicious ground and pound. You mentioned the back takes as well. Like, I think he has multiple ways to finish this fight, and I think he does, because Durden, while he may come on strong early pushing that wrestling grappling pace, I'm not convinced he's going to have much success doing that, and then I think he's going to gas himself out and probably get himself finished. So I'm with you. I kind of think Mokayev gets it done here, and I think he does it inside the distance.
I'm glad to get the John Kelly approval on my first play of the evening. I know it's a spot that's kind of been more debated throughout our community than I expected to be when I put in the play. We can move on now to the second fight of the night. We got Corey McKenna, who's a minus 235 favorite. She's 1-0 inside the UFC against Elise Reed, who comes back plus 190. Elise Reed is 0-1 inside the UFC. DK prices here have McKenna at 8.4K, Reed down at 7.4K. And this is kind of an interesting matchup because look at, Corey McKenna, I actually thought she lost her UFC debut to Kay Hansen in a competitive fight that featured a good amount of grappling. But similar to Mokayev, she's an English prospect. She's only 22 years old. She has some decent grappling in her back pocket, I think. And Elise Reed, let's be honest, Elise Reed had a tough debut in the UFC against Sijara Eubanks. Say what you want about Eubanks, but she was way bigger than Elise Reed in that matchup that Reed took up, I think, at 135 pounds, if not 125. Regardless, she was way undersized for the division, but honestly, even more so than just being undersized, she's a pretty poor grappler. And I've seen some takes throughout the week, like Corey McKenna is undersized even at 115. She could be a 105er. And I actually think the same thing about Elise Reed, but size aside, I think McKenna is just a way better grappler here. Like, Elise Reed is close to a D- F level grappler, which is just not something we really see too often in 2022 with everyone becoming so much more of a well-rounded fighter as opposed to like having so many different specialists. Like, Elise Reed is someone who is still lagging, like way behind in the grappling. She's got a decent karate game, but like not a ton of finishing upside at her weight class. So honestly, like, I understand that Corey McKenna is small. I understand that she probably should have lost her UFC debut, but even like grappling competitively with Kay Hansen, we saw her fight Vanessa Demopoulos on Contender Series. I just think McKenna is better. I think she gets the fight to the ground at some point. And am I laying it at minus 245? Probably not. Like, I could see a lot of scenarios where this fight plays out more competitive, especially if it's on the feet for a full 15. But I think Corey McKenna is the better fighter here. I expect her to get the job done this weekend. Jon, any take for you here in McKenna versus Reed?
Yeah, I think I'm closer to betting the underdog than I would be to betting the favorite. And it's not that I think Elise Reed is like some high-level prospect or anything like that. Like, I'm not high on either of these girls per se. I agree with you. I think McKenna obviously does have the grappling upside, but I don't think that she's like some stud grappler either. And it's not like she aggressively looks to wrestle either. Like, I do expect her to try to get the fight to the ground. I don't think her takedowns are that great, but they really shouldn't need to be that great against Elise Reed. Elise Reed has like some okay, first level takedown defense in space, but once you get her up against the cage, once you wear on her a little bit, I think she could be taken down here. And when she is taken down, that's the thing you hit on, is like, she could easily be controlled. She could easily be submitted. So those are my concerns if backing the underdog in Reed. But at the same time, like, I think seeing McKenna at minus 250 or higher is a pretty big concern. Like, I would not be putting my money anywhere near her. So this one's probably just a pass for me either way. But like I said, I'd have more interest in just taking the dog shot on Reed on the consensus that like McKenna shouldn't be this big of a favorite against almost anybody in the UFC.
I think that's fair. So it sounds like we're both kind of passing in terms of the betting market on that fight. I had a bet on the first fight of the night. John, I know your first bet of the evening comes on the third fight of the night. We got Jack Shore, who's undefeated 15-0, currently about an even money underdog here to Timur Valeev, who comes back minus 120 after 2 consecutive UFC wins. He's $8,600. Is Valeev on DraftKings? Shore just 7.6K. And look, this is a line that opened like Shore in the plus 155 range. I had some, early interest. Things got away from me. I wasn't necessarily able to hop on an early line. A lot of people did on Jack Shore. And John, if I'm not mistaken, you may have started the trend. You may have been a market mover here on the Jack Shore side. I know you got to play in early on him in the FTN bets tracker. Talk to me about the thought process here.
Yeah, we're big Jack Shore guys on this show. I know you're high on Jack Shore. I am as well. He's one of my favorite prospects. I mean, he's just got a lot of tools that I like to back in a young up-and-coming fighter. Obviously, the pace that he puts on his opponents, the wrestling, the high-level grappling as well. Once he peels his opponents to the ground, he's always hunting, advancing, hunting for submissions. And this is a spot where I think Valeev is getting just a little bit too much respect in the market, in the sense that, like, I really don't think his grappling is all that great. And it's not to say that he's a bad grappler at all, but it's just the fact that, like, you have seen him taken down on the regional scene. You have seen him controlled as well. And it's like, I know he has, like, I think he has ties to Dagestan as well, but he's not the same type of fighter as like a Mokayev or like the Nurmagomedovs in that sense. Like, I really think he's overrated in terms of the grappling, and his striking is good. Like, he's out there throwing flashy question mark kicks. He's going to beat up the calves here, and that's a liability for sure, as he could get his leg beat up quite a bit. But I really don't think this fight is going to play out in space too often. I expect Shore to push forward, to cage push. I expect this to be a very grindy style, typical Jack Shore fight, where a lot of it is up against the fence. And Valeev, I mentioned I think Shore's the better wrestler. I think Shore's the better grappler, and I think that's where I kind of disagree with some of the takes that are out there. I think a lot of people are respecting Valeev's grappling a little bit too much here, but also I think what almost nobody is talking about is Valeev's cardio is not good. Like, we've seen it multiple times in his fights, even in the UFC, where he definitely starts to slow down after round one. We saw then in the Trevin Jones fight, and that he ended up paying the price for it, because he started to slow down, the output slowed down, but defensively the footwork slowed down. His guard, he stopped raising his guard as much, ate a big shot from Trevin Jones, went to sleep. And then you saw it against Hani Barcelos. He came out, he likes to come out hot early, and then he ends up getting dropped later. Like, he gets tired, his durability's not great. I think Shore's going to wear on him in that grindy style matchup, where I think Shore's the better grappler. I think Shore could push that pace for 15 minutes. He's proved that. He did that last fight on a torn bicep. Like, I just think you're getting a guy who I think is more proven over 15 minutes, and I think is the better grappler. So he's obviously liable to get hurt in space, but like I said, I don't think this fight is going to play out that often in space. And like, I think a lot of people have a bad taste in their mouths from the Shore Hunter Azure fight, where like he couldn't really muscle him to the ground and out grapple him. But like, Hunter Azure is like a multi-year state champion wrestler. Like, I don't think Valeev's takedown defense is that good. Like, Trevin Jones was able to take him down. We've seen him taken down, like I said, multiple times. So it's just a spot where I think we're kind of getting a nice, well, at least we were, like, I backed Shore early, like you said, plus 154. That's a 2-unit play for me on FanDuel. So I got in at the opener. It's now down to like plus 100. So definitely got the CLV curse there. But like I said, I mean, this is just a spot where I think Valeev, you're really having to buy high on him. And I think people are just kind of piecing this narrative together to make him kind of better than I think he is, just because he ended up winning a decision against Hani Barcelos that I'm not even sure that he won, where he got dropped twice anyway. So yeah, I'm backing my guy Jack Shore. What do you think about it, Jonah?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, congratulations on the COV. It's nice that you got in early. Before I give my take on the fight, take a sip of water, gather yourself, because I'm going to kick it back to you. One thing that I think is probably most interesting about this fight in general, and Sean mentioned it in our chat on YouTube right now as we're live at John Kelly DFS on YouTube, mentioned, what do you make of Jack Shore in the DFS streets? Because, yeah, you got in early at plus 154, John, in the betting market, but now he's plus 100 market wide. So he's pretty much an even money underdog, given, 48% chance to win the fight implied. $7,600 on DraftKings. He's probably going to wrestle in a win, as he has in every one of his other UFC wins. There's some massive favorites on this card that people want to pay up for, and there's some underdogs that people just don't want to touch because they're plus 300, plus 400. So I haven't looked at any like ownership projections, but I would be absolutely shocked if Jack Shore is not get like the highest owned underdog of the slate. I mean, probably not with Aspinall in the main event, but he's going to be top 3, top 5 most owned fighters on the slate, period. And, I guess the question I have for you, John, is like, what do you do with that? Like, are you still getting over the field being overweight on Jack Shore? Or is it something where you got in early in the betting market, but maybe you match the field and tone it down a bit in DFS? I'm curious your thought process.
Yeah, I mean, I think matching the field is fine. I would lean towards either matching or being overweight. Obviously, if you like the Valeev side, you're likely going to get more leverage. So you might as well just go super overweight on Valeev because you're getting that extra leverage. But for me, because I think Shore wins the fight, I'm more likely to be match the field or higher. The reason why I would say, like, a lot of these times I'm just going to be like, all right, well, I'm going to look to double the field if I'm that confident. But it's not because I'm not confident he wins. It's because I'm not confident that this fight even scores well. Because it's like, yes, he could score well, but we could also see just a lot of cage push if he's maybe not able to get as many takedowns. Like maybe he only lands 2 to 3 takedowns, doesn't get a finish, the fight goes to decision. He's not really crushing even at a cheap price tag under 8K. So I'm going to have a lot. I'm just saying, like, that's the case for you to not be all in on a guy like Jack Shore.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. And one thing that we've been talking about a little bit in Discord, I was talking about it with a subscriber last weekend, is like, it's okay to play the chalk in MMA. Like, I think it's okay to play Jack Shore, but one thing that you might want to consider doing, especially if you're like running mass multi-entry, is making a group of like Jack Shore, Tom Aspinall. I'm sure Volkov will be high owned as well. Nathaniel Wood will be high owned, especially if he gets a pretty shitty short notice replacement. Maybe you make a group of those guys and you set a maximum of like 1 or 2 in your lineup. So like, yeah, you could be overweight on Jack Shore. If you like the Tom Aspinall side, you could be overweight there, but kind of limiting the amount of lineups you build with them both. That way you're kind of getting some lower owned pieces mixed in with the chalk. So I think if you're going to play Jack Shore, it's perfectly fine. I'll probably be overweight to the field on him just because I really don't like any of the other underdogs this weekend, but it is something that I'm kind of cognizant of as I'm making my teams, is kind of ownership of the entire team, knowing that Jack Shore is going to be super highly owned because objectively he is the best underdog play on the slate. In terms of the betting market, I thought Jack Shore at plus 155 was definitely going to be a bet for me. The market just kind of got away from me. I wasn't able to do stuff. Over the weekend, I came back. John Kelly betted. Everyone tailed him, and suddenly it was plus 120. I thought it was pretty thin at plus 120 to the point where like I considered still playing him. There's a plus 125 out there. I almost pulled the trigger, but at even money, I think it's a pretty easy pass at this point. Like I like Jack Shore as a prospect. I always talk about, I like Mokayev. I think he could be minus 400 to Cody Durden, but I'm not sure he's top 5, top 10. I'm pretty sure, despite being at a stacked weight class, that Jack Shore has like top 5 potential here at 27 years old. My only issue with Jack Shore is he hasn't really faced anybody inside the UFC. And like you mentioned, the Hunter Azure fight, probably the most difficult test of his career. And he passed it with flying colors in the grand scheme of things, 30-27. The one concern I had is he didn't really look comfortable on the feet in that matchup. He got outstruck at distance pretty bad. Like the only reason I'm not playing him at even money is I think that if Valiev's takedown defense holds up, I think it's pretty competitive, if not small favorite to Valeev on the feet. So I think the price is about right. But obviously, if you got it up like plus 154, it's a massive edge in my opinion. So good on you, John, for getting in there. No action for me on the Valeev Shore fight at current market. We can move on to the next fight of the night. We got Nikita Krylov. He's minus 190. He's 8.7K against Paul Craig, who comes back plus 160, $7,500, on DraftKings. And this is an interesting matchup because if you look at Nikita Krylov, the guys he's been losing to recently, and he's only 30 years old. He's been in the UFC for what feels like almost a decade at this point, and he's just really started to come around. His last losses are to Jan Blachowicz, Glover Teixeira, and Magomed Ankalaev, and pretty much outside of that, he's been beating everybody else he faces recently inside the UFC. Paul Craig, on the other hand, has put together like a nice little win streak himself. Obviously, his last fight, massive win on pay-per-view over Jamal Hill, and then I think he had won 2 fights prior to that, and then a draw with Shogun as well. So Paul Craig is certainly kind of started picking up in the UFC, a guy who I think was kind of like a meme at some point in his career. And I think there's still people who think he like isn't the most talented guy in the world and always just plays off his back. But I'm a big fan of Paul Craig's fighting style. I think he's a lot of fun, entertaining to watch. But in terms of how I see the matchup breaking down here, I do think Nikita Krylov deserves to be a favorite. I think he's just a better skill set for winning MMA minutes than Paul Craig is, and he still does have finishing upside. Like I think Krylov is the better striker in this matchup. He's got a nice head kick. His boxing is, I don't think it's anything great, but it's certainly better than Paul Craig's striking is. And Craig's striking has actually improved throughout his UFC tenure, but still not a guy who, like, I'm picking out strike pretty much anyone at 205 pounds. The grappling, like, I do think Krylov's going to spend more time on top than Craig, but I do think Paul Craig is live to win the fight pretty much the way he is every single week. We got a subscriber at FTNJ Brand who hit me up earlier this week, and he was like, is Paul Craig live this weekend? And I'm like, if Paul Craig's in a cage fight, he's live just due to his fighting style. Like, he's live to finish literally anybody in the world. Look at the Magomed Ankalaev fight for Paul Craig, where he's 10 seconds left. He's clearly down 2 rounds. He's getting the shit beat out of him. He just throws up a triangle. Obviously, you're not betting a guy at plus 160 hoping that his only chance to win is the last second triangle, but Paul Craig is a real finisher on the ground. We've seen Krylov dive into guillotines before. I think he's been submitted inside the UFC 3 times. I played this fight a little bit, I got a little weird in this matchup. I got a little off the board. I played Paul Craig scorecards equals no action, so only action if the fight finishes inside the distance at plus 190. It's also plus 180 at DraftKings right now. To me, it's just wild that a Paul Craig fight would ever be shorter on the money line than he is in the finish only market, because this is a guy who's literally never won a decision in his entire career. I don't think he can beat Krylov on a decision because he's not outstriking him, and he's probably not going to be in top position enough when they grapple. But in terms of the finishing potential, there's no way that Paul Craig is plus 190 if either of these guys is finding a finish. Like, I don't think Krylov is going to tap him consistently on the ground. I suppose he can knock him out on the feet, but Krylov doesn't really hit that hard. And Paul Craig, he has lost by knockout a few times in the UFC, but he's a tough guy to get out of there. You really need to be like a Khalil Roundtree type, an Alonzo Menafield type, like those type of physical monsters who are getting him out of there. And I don't necessarily know that Krylov could do that. So I played Craig finish only market plus 190 for a unit. I also played him by sub plus 550, just an absolutely wild price. Like, anyone watching our show knows that Paul Craig is a grappler first. Technically, his last 2 wins are by knockout, but of his 7 UFC wins, 5 by submission. Krylov's been tapped, like I mentioned. Just against a wild price. Like, Paul Craig by sub should pretty much never be plus 550, even if he's going to close plus 200 in a fight. Like, that's usually his path to victory. So I thought that number was crazy. So I got a unit on a scorecards no action plus 190 and a half unit on submission plus 550 for the Bear Jew. John, any action for you here in Craig versus Krylov?
Yeah, sorry. What was the book you got that at 550? If you know,
550. I bet it at Fox Bet like an hour ago.
Okay.
It's still out there.
Yeah,
because it was also available at the Superbook as well.
I bet FanDuel, and I thought FanDuel had a good number at plus 420. 550 is like, that's very good in my opinion. So shout out to you. I still like it at 420. I think it's still available on FanDuel. It's just a spot like you hit on the main things. It's like Nikita Krylov, skill for skill, is probably the better minute winner here. He's the better fighter, but at the same time, like, Paul Craig has proven time and time again he's a dangerous submission grappler. You give this guy enough opportunities, he's probably going to choke you out or find some sort of finish. And Nikita Krylov, if we could say one negative thing about him, over the course of his career, he's consistently putting himself in bad spots against decent grapplers and paying the price. 5 of his 6 losses have come by submission, and it's because his fight IQ is just not there. So it's like, do I trust him to stay safe against Paul Craig and avoid the grappling exchanges? I really don't, not at a plus 420 price for Craig's win condition. So I'm going to take this shot on Paul Craig. I bet it for a unit at plus 420. So I'm with you. I hope the Bear Jew Craig gets it done for us. He's a Scottish fighter, right? Scotland's own?
Yeah, Scotland's own.
Scotland's own, yeah. Hope he comes through for us with the war paint on Saturday.
Me as well. Yeah. Just a reminder, like, you guys should always be price shopping in terms of the prop market on MMA. Like, obviously, if you're looking at like major markets money line, there's, you should always be looking for the best of the number, but everything's going to be fairly uniform throughout fight week. But like, when you go to the props, I mean, there's places with Paul Craig sub and like plus 275 and then other places at plus 550. So whatever you have accessible to you, I would do my best as a viewer to just kind of try to get the best of the number always, but specifically in markets like MMA props where there's just such a wide range from book to book. So yeah, I got plus 550 on Paul Craig sub. I think John got plus 450. Either one is good. Both of them are worth a bet, in my opinion. Hopefully he comes through and gets that submission win on Saturday morning for us. We can move on now. Next fight in the heavyweight division, we got Sergey Pavlovich. Minus 310. He's 9K flat on DraftKings against Shamil Abdulrakimov, who's plus 245, 7.2K for Shamil. And this is just a fight that I kind of have no interest in betting. Pavlovich has not fought in 2.5 years. He hasn't fought since 2019, but he's only 29 years old. Theoretically should be an improving fighter. And Shamil is kind of on the other end of that age range. He's 40 years old now. He's been knocked out twice in a row. His most recent fight against Chris Dawkins was like 6 months ago. I bet him, and I didn't think he looked that great prior to the knockout. I don't know. I feel like maybe Shamil a little bit of value here, plus 250, John, because Sergey hasn't fought in 2.5 years and hasn't really proven to be like an elite guy. Look, if you're at heavyweight and you're not facing like the Alan Bados of the world and you don't have a grappling advantage, I'm not playing you on the money line at minus 300. So my only question here is, do I bet Shamil? And honestly, at 40, I think I'm happy to pass, but I could be talked into it. Do you have any interest in backing Shamil as a big underdog, John?
It's funny you say that because I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm like, I get the thesis behind backing Abdulrakimov at this number. Like, it's a big price tag. He's the more well-rounded fighter, the more proven fighter over the course of his career. And on the flip side, Pavlovich has looked like a stud early on. Like, he was finished against Overeem in his debut, came back, knocked out 2 guys in the first round. And Maurice Green is like, yeah, that's not super impressive. But at the same time, like, he has a ton of power. Most of his wins have come by knockout. Most of them are in the first round. So while that's like a blessing, it's also a curse in a sense where it's like, yeah, he has the early knockout power, but also outside of the first round, if he doesn't get that early knockout, his cardio is somewhat untested. I think he's only been to decision like once in his career, or he only has 1 decision victory. So Abdulrakimov, I think he could fight better over 15 minutes if he could also, mix in the grappling. He averages like 1 takedown per 15 minutes. He's the better grappler in this matchup. If he can do those things and avoid dying early, then for sure he's live at this big number. So it's like, it's one of those things you wrestle with where I get the play, but I also think the most likely outcome is he probably does get hurt in the first round. So it's one of those things that I kind of have to think through a little bit more before Saturday. But in terms of DraftKings, I'm definitely going to have some Pavlovich shares just because I think that early knockout upside is for real. And then on the flip side, I'm not going to shy away from Abdulrakimov just because I do think he's a live underdog and he's super cheap. So in a win, he doesn't have to do much to pay off that price tag.
100% agree on both fronts for DraftKings. I'm probably more likely to like have more Shamil just in my lineups because I'm going to need more underdogs. Like, I feel really good about some of the favorites. Obviously, we've got like 2 minus 500 guys that we're yet to talk about on the show, in addition to probably Nathaniel Wood, who's going to be a big favorite, and Mokayev as well. But yeah, I think I'm shorter on underdog targets that I want to play on DK. So just by that nature, I'll probably have more Shamil than I probably feel comfortable with. But that's just how I'm going to choose to get my exposure to the fight. I don't feel the need to bet on him, even if plus 250 is kind of a wild number, considering the fact that Pavlovich hasn't fought in 2.5 years and hasn't really proven a ton when he is inside the cage, in my opinion. So we can move on now to the next matchup, one that I think is really interesting from a betting standpoint. We've got 2 guys that are basically carbon copies of one another. We got Mike Grundy, who's currently a minus 180 favorite. He's $8,500 on DraftKings. He's on Amirkhani, who's plus 155, 7K or 7.7K, I should say, on DraftKings. And John, I'll let you go first here. Basically, 2 guys who are like super wrestle heavy, have almost no striking, and they're matched up against each other here. One is a minus 180 favorite. I think there's decent reasons for Grundy to be the favorite in the matchup, but it's interesting. I think these guys have a lot of similarities. Should be an interesting matchup. You can't even call it a clash of styles. You can call it like a mirror of styles against one another. What are your thoughts here on Grundy versus Amirkhani?
Yeah, you hit on it, is like these guys are trying to do almost the same thing. They're going to mix in the takedowns. I think Grundy averages like just under 4 takedowns per 15. Amirkhani averages just over 4 takedowns per 15 minutes. So it's like these guys are clearly going to try to get the fight to the mat. And then once they do, they're going to go through their submission, that front choke arsenal for Amirkhani is for real. I think he's live to win by submission. And on the flip side, I would say Grundy has more power on the feet. So maybe he clips Amirkhani. We've seen Amirkhani hurt a couple times. I favor Grundy because I think his wrestling is just, his pure wrestling is better. I think Amirkhani is more dangerous grappler, but I also think Amirkhani's durability and cardio are worse. So it's like, when the fight was around a pick'em, I favor Grundy because of those things. Now the line's kind of blown out to the point where it's like, if I had to choose a side, I would probably go the Amirkhani side. But it's like, it's one of those things where I wouldn't be shocked at really any outcome here. I do lean Grundy just because, like I said, Amirkhani, the durability and the cardio are real concerns. And also, like, I expect him to be the one spending more time on his back in this matchup. So for all of those reasons, I lean Grundy, but I do think we're getting a little bit crazy seeing how big the line has moved in favor of Mike Grundy. But I think you have a play on Grundy, so let's hear it.
I actually didn't play Grundy. I was certainly interested at -130. Our buddy Sean Orr, who's been a guest on the show before, was trying to talk me into it last week, telling me that I should, be looking ahead and looking at the Grundy line. And honestly, I think he was probably, now that I've done the work on the fight, I think he was, marginally value at -130, even up to like -150. But we're getting to the point, John, where like obviously anyone who watches our show knows like we have fighters we like, we look at the styles, but ultimately you're betting a number, right? When you're betting on sports, you're betting into a market that has a number. And to me, -180 is just a number that with Mike Grundy, I'm not comfortable laying. I agree with everything you said in terms of how they break down. Like, I think Grundy has better pace. I think he's more durable. I think he's more likely to win round 3. I think he's more likely to move forward in the face of adversity. Like, I feel like that's priced in. Like, that's the reason he's -180. Because technically speaking, I don't think he's like necessarily a way better wrestler than Makwan Amirkhani. I think his grappling, like his front choke series of Makwan that you spoke about, John, I think is probably better than anything Grundy has in terms of like submission offense. So I don't know. Like, I favor Grundy for the reasons that I think a lot of people favor him, and it's just kind of like the intangible stuff, heart, cardio, durability. But honestly, that's pretty priced in at -180. It's not priced in so much that I feel like we're getting a coin flip and I get +150 on one side of the coin with Makwan, because I do think he deserves to be the underdog. Bottom line, I feel like the line is accurate, and it's not a spot that I want to get involved in. In terms of DraftKings, I think it's interesting. So I think the winner is going to get a decent amount of takedowns, and it could even be a spot where we keep talking about how there's no underdogs we want to play. Like maybe we play Shamil, and even if he scores low in a win, it'll be optimal. I do think there's like a scenario in which, and I'm not saying I'm going to stack this fight or anything. I think there's like a scenario where Makwan could lose this fight, but land 5 or 6 takedowns in the first few rounds and be like one of the better underdogs on DraftKings. So by that nature, I'll have a little bit more Makwan on DraftKings just because he's cheaper. And like I said, I need all the savings I could get so I could get up into that 9K range for my, studs of my lineup. But I think Grundy's the rightful favorite. It should be like a completely hilarious fight. I expect both of them to just be doing the same thing over and over again until Makwan probably gasses out in like minute 8, and then Grundy starts, having a little bit more success. So funny fight, but not one that I'm looking to have action on inside of the betting market. Now move on to the main card here, and or actually this is the last fight on the prelims. We got 6 fights left to break down. One thing I will mention is of the 6 fights left, 3 of them have favorites in the -500 range, which is obviously like a massive implied favorite to win the fight, which I think is something we should be touching on in terms of the DraftKings discussion on our show, just because there's a lot of fighters who objectively are great plays, but I think we should try to kind of, tier them a little bit and figure out who like the best play is in terms of DFS this weekend, because, obviously guys who are -500 are always going to be great plays in a vacuum, but on a slate with so many guys in this range, we're going to really have to be able to pick.
Uh-oh. Did we lose Jonah? Oh, man. The first time in what? A month? Or the first time since switching over to Discord from StreamYard, we lost him. All right. Well, I'm sure he's going to reconnect. We'll give him a minute here. He is frozen as hell. Well, I guess hell isn't frozen, so that was a bad example. Yeah, we'll go ahead and I'm just going to start with the next fight. Toporia versus Jai Herbert here, and kind of what Jonah was saying, and he's frozen on the screen here, so I'm going to go big screen until he gets back just so it doesn't look as bad. But kind of what he was saying, like between multiple guys in that upper 9K range, like I kind of think that Toporia is maybe the safest, because I think he has... So obviously his win equity is close to those other guys, if not more, but also I think his floor and ceiling is higher, because I really think he wins in round 1, to be honest. Like, he could win on the feet with his power. Jai Herbert's been knocked out multiple times. Jai Herbert, the fighting style that he has, he's the type of fighter that is gonna look to stand and trade on the feet with Toporia, and I think that's a mistake. Like, I back Toporia by knockout at +230 for a unit, just because Jai Herbert, like I said, he's been knocked out twice, but we've also seen him hurt multiple times as well. Like, the guy does not have much of a chin, and just his fighting style dictates a finish one way or the other, because if Jai Herbert wins, it's coming by knockout. I highly doubt that happens against Toporia, who I think is the better technical striker, the better boxer, better footwork, he's faster, and also it's like Jai Herbert's grappling is not good whatsoever. If Toporia takes this fight to the ground, I think he's probably submitting Jai Herbert here. So that's why I say, like, when it comes to these expensive guys, I think he's probably my favorite because I really think the round one, if not round one, then round two finish is super likely. And if it doesn't come by knockout, like, obviously I bet him by knockout. I hope that happens. But if it doesn't, then it likely involves a takedown or two as well. So that would just add to his DraftKings score either way. So I like Toporia here. It looks like Jonah was back, but now he's gone again. So I'm gonna keep going. Herbert KO for the people, says Pepe. I don't know about that, man. Jai Herbert, funny story, since we got a little time here. When Herbert was booked against Mike Davis, I tweeted out Mike Davis by highlight reel KO, and Jai Herbert must have been like searching his name on Twitter or something like that, because Jai Herbert was like one of the first people that favorited that tweet. Like, I guess to like save the receipt and come back at me if he beat Mike Davis, but ended up not happening. Now he got booked against Toporia, and I kind of think the outcome's the same. I think Toporia knocks him out. All right, what is going on with Jonah? Pepe said wellness check on Jonah. It looks like he's reconnecting right now. Do we have him back? We shall see. It looks like he is back. Jonah, can you hear me? Wellness check. 1 2 1 2. We had him and he froze again. Wow. He did tell me before the show that his buddy was playing, or his roommate was playing Fortnite.
No.
So maybe he's lagging the entire connection. Oh, do we have him? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you loud and clear. It looks like you are back. Thank you.
I can't see you, but I can hear you, which is all we need. I don't think it was any Fortnite misdoing. I think we're allegedly supposed to have a snowstorm tomorrow, Colorado, and there's no snow outside, but the power went down. So we'll see. I'm just looking for a snow day in terms of March Madness viewership tomorrow. But my bad on that, John. Where were we in the show?
No, you're good. I was rambling on about Toporia. I've gave my breakdown for the fight. Basically, I bet Toporia by knockout at plus 230. But it's like, even if he doesn't win by knockout, I think his floor and ceiling's high for DK, just because if he doesn't win by knockout, he probably mixes in the takedowns, mixes in the grappling, and Jai Herbert, we know, is not sound defensively in terms of the grappling. So it's like, I just think there's a big chance Toporia hurts him, gets him out of there in round one, or submits him within the first 2 rounds, which obviously would involve a takedown or two. So I just think he probably has the safest floor and ceiling when it comes to him, Paddy Pimblett, all those expensive fighters. So I think I'd lean with him as my favorite of those. Oh, he's frozen again. You are killing me. Maybe Herbert stands a chance. I'll play him in one lineup. I mean, if Toporia is kind of fell in love with his hands coming off 2 first-round knockouts, if he just wants to stand and bang, then Herbert's live. I mean, he's going to be longer. Maybe he catches him with something big, but I don't know, man. I'd be surprised. I like Toporia. I think Toporia is like a legitimate contender type prospect. I'm not gonna fade him with a low level banger like Jai. What's his nickname? Black Country Banger, I think. Jai Herbert, one of the better nicknames in the game. All right, we shall move right along. It looks like if Jonah comes back, maybe we'll circle back on the Toporia fight just to get his take. But if not, then we're gonna move along, because I believe we have, is it the Molly McCann fight next? I didn't have it pulled up. Give me 1 second. Sorry, guys.
I think I'm back.
Oh, he's back. All right. I was about to move on to Molly McCann, but give us your take on the Toporia Jai Herbert fight.
Yeah, sorry about that again. I think it's a blowout. I was looking for a cheaper way to bet these guys in the betting market as opposed to laying the minus 500 prices. I played Toporia to win by first round finish today at plus 165 on WinBet, or plus 166, one of those two numbers. Just think it's a spot where like a ton of his win equity, close to 45%, comes in round one, maybe even 50%. I wouldn't be surprised if it's like one takedown and then a quick tap. So I expect Toporia to roll early. I'm not quite as high as everyone else on Toporia. I still think there's a little bit of concern with his gas tank, but I don't think that Jai Herbert is the guy to really test him and drag him into those deeper waters. So I think Toporia wins in round one. Pretty solid value here. I expect him to, put up a massive score on DraftKings. I'm not going to say he's my favorite play on DK just because with so little underdogs, man, like 9.1K to 9.3K feels like a decent amount of savings. And I think that Mokayev has a chance to land like 10 takedowns in his matchup. So I think he's probably my second favorite play on DraftKings. I'd heard you mention that he was your favorite player overall. Certainly a strong play. So yeah, I think Toporia rolls in this matchup. I played him to win in round one at plus 167. Anything else worth mentioning here in this next fight before we move on, John, to the main card?
No, I think we can move on to my girl, Molly McCann. Meatball Molly, let's go.
Yes, sir. Next fight of the night. First up on the main card here at UFC London, we got Meatball Molly. She's a minus 135 favorite. 8.4K on DraftKings against Luana Carolina, who comes back here. It's a plus 115 dog. She's $7.8 thousand on DK. And look, Luana Carolina, someone who I think was pretty lowly rated by the masses, the betting market, the MMA community in general, was 1-1 in the UFC, just got knee barred by Ariane Lipsky, who's not known for grappling. But she went out there, she put together two I think unanimous decisions at the Apex against Poliana Butella and Lupita Godinez, and mostly won those fights due to her size. I think she's not going to be as massive against Molly McCann as she was in those matchups. But look, Carolina's put 2 wins together. Molly McCann probably has a better UFC track record. She's only minus 135 this weekend. John, I know she's your girl. Do you have any action or interest, I should say, in getting down in the action with Molly McCann?
You know I have interest. I always have interest in backing my girl. I mean, she's a cash cow for me. Like, there's only been like one time where she legitimately burned us, and I think we both bet her. Was it what was that fight? She was like a pick'em. It was on a pay-per-view card.
One of the first shows we ever did together, I think, honestly.
Was it that long ago? Wow. That's
maybe
wild.
like Tyler Santos, July of 2020.
Yeah, that sounds right. Was that the Daniel Cormier fight? The
that was
card?
I think Cater versus Ige.
Oh,
I can't think of a Molly fight that was on the Cormier card. Regardless, we certainly did not.
I'm pretty sure that's what it was, though, where we bet her against Tyler Santos, and that was Santos's second fight. So she was coming off the Barella loss, and we just didn't rate her.
In hindsight, it was bad.
It was bad. It was real bad. Because now Santos, like, I'm gonna bet Santos against Valentina. Like, that's how far I've swung in favor of Santos. But my girl Molly, like, we just know what she's gonna bring for us here. And against somebody like Luana Carolina, high volume striker. Molly's a high volume striker as well. You know, obviously she's a bit of a headhunter. She's basically only a boxer. She's not gonna mix in the leg kicks. And it's like, Carolina kind of needs that space to mix in the leg kicks, use her length. Molly's not going to give her that. Molly, we know, is going to push forward. She's going to push her up against the cage. She's going to be landing the bigger shots and the heavier shots. And that's always going to play better in the eyes of the judges. And then on top of that, she's the one with the wrestling upside as well. And it's not like her wrestling's that good. We talked about it time and time again. Like, she's not a great wrestler, but she can just do enough and muscle opponents up against the cage, peel them to the ground. She just has good optics. You know, fans and judges love to see that moving forward, landing the bigger shots, you know, trying to wrestle, cage push. Like, that's all going to be scoring, whereas Carolina is just kind of going to be getting backed up trying to land volume, and her volume's not going to be as impactful as Molly McCann. So while McCann does have like suspect defense, you know, she just eats a ton of shots as she's moving forward, winging heavies. It really doesn't matter to me, because it's like, I think it's going to be a competitive striking match, and I have the fighter who's I know is going to be moving forward, owning the center, having better optics, and then I have the wrestling upside as well. I'm always going to back Molly McCann in that type of spot. So I backed her by decision at plus 115, just because it's like, I talked with, I think it was Combat in one of the Discords we're in, shout out to him, where it's like, we were kind of talking through it. It's like, what would a finish even look like on either side here? Like, it would have to be like a bad stoppage, or like just Molly going nuts against the cage and like just an early stoppage. Like, I just think it's super, super low percentage. Like, I think this fight goes the full 15 minutes at a very, very high clip. So even though you're not getting much better of a number, like McCann's minus 135 on the money line, I'm still willing to play the decision prop to get plus 115, just because I feel so strongly that this does go the full 15 minutes. So I like my girl Meatball Molly. She's got the other Scousers on the card. She's not going to lose, man. It's not happening. UFC London, Molly's going to have the crowd. She's going to have all her buddies cheering for her. Like, let's go, man. I mean, this is easy work for our girl Meatball.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to bring up in this fight. I like that you played the decision prop. One thing for everybody out there, a good way to kind of look at at playing a decision props is you're basically just parlaying Molly McCann's money line with a fight to go the distance, which is like what, -300 at this point. So I don't hate that myself. I favor Molly to win. John, you mentioned like she moves forward. I do think that having a hometown advantage here in this matchup will help her in terms of the judges. Like she's always someone who kind of, I think, has pretty solid optics for the judges, pushes forward frequently, and kind of puts her opponent against the back of the fence despite eating shots herself. I'm picking Molly McCann to win against Luana Carolina, who I don't really rate as very good at all. Like I honestly think Molly could like out grapple her, but I don't know, man. It's a fight that I have no interest in. If we got Molly as like a small dog, I would take a bite, but plus 115 for decision only, I think is decent. Not something I'm betting myself, but anything here to add on the Meatball Molly fight before we move on and keep going through the main card?
No, I just think you're being a coward for not backing our girl. That's all I'll say about that.
It's certainly possible. Let's move on. We got 4 fights left. Next fight up, we got Gunnar Nelson returning to the cage. After a pretty extended layoff, Gunnar Nelson has not fought since September of 2019 when he lost to Gilbert Burns. I believe he even, hinted at retirement or did commit to a retirement since that point in time. But anyway, he makes his return to the cage this weekend as a -400 favorite. He's $9,200 on DraftKings. He takes on Takashi Sato, who comes back plus 360, 7K flat for Sato on DraftKings. And John, I guess my question to you, I'll let you go first here, is just like, how bad does Takashi Sato have to be as a grappler to ever, let Gunnar Nelson be -500 when he hasn't fought in 2.5 years? I wasn't even a super trustworthy guy at these type of prices prior to his long layoff.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, I mean, you see Gunnar Nelson at a price tag like this, and you're like, what are we doing here? Like, the guy hasn't fought in what, 30 months or whatever it is, 2.5 years. But
probably more. Yeah.
Is it more? Like, I know it's been a long time. And it's like when he was fighting, obviously he was fighting like the top level guys in this division, but he wasn't beating them. Like, he's lost 3 of his last 4 fights. Obviously, this is a massive step down in competition. But on the flip side, like Takashi Sato, yeah, he hits hard, but it's like you take this guy down, you're probably going to sub him. Bilal Muhammad subbed him. I cashed a 12-1 ticket on Miguel Baeza, his first UFC submission victory. He subbed him, and then I think he was subbed one more time as well. Like, the dude just cannot grapple. You take him down, you take his back, you're going to choke him out. And I think Gunnar Nelson, even though I have a ton of concerns about Gunnar Nelson in general, I think he probably wins by submission here. So it's just a pass for me, man. There's a ton of question marks kind of on both sides. I don't hate people taking a shot on the underdog just because the number is big. And it's like, if Gunnar doesn't sub him, he's not really a good minute winner. And it's not like he's a super high level wrestler. Like, he only averages like 1.4 takedown. So it's just a spot where I'm willing to pass. I think there's better fighters priced around Gunnar Nelson for sure on DraftKings. And then I think there's just better underdogs to where I'm not going to take like a super overweight stance on Sato either.
Yeah, so I knew coming into the week in terms of the market, I knew I'm never betting Gunnar Nelson at this point. He's not a parlay piece, nothing like that. Like, just not to be trusted at -500 in general, especially considering the circumstances here. But then I kind of tried to dive into the Takashi Sato side, and I'll tell you just right off the bat, I don't have a play on the fight. But in terms of just kind of trying to dissect Sato as a fighter, originally I just thought he was like super shitty grappler, mediocre volume with a decent amount of power. But then you go back and look at his matchups, like his 2 knockout wins in the UFC are Ben Saunders in a fight that, he was getting outstruck at distance in that fight prior to winning it. And then like Jason Witt, where he knocked out Jason Witt in the first round, but kind of like everyone has a chance to knock out Jason Witt in the first round. And in hindsight, I bet Jason Witt is an underdog in that matchup. I think it was his UFC debut. In hindsight, I think like pretty solid bet. I think he wins that fight a really high clip, despite the fact that he got knocked out. That's just kind of an interesting lesson to learn in general. As a lot of people, we victory lap the 15-second, the 2-minute knockouts, but in theory, you need to see a fight play out a little bit longer oftentimes to make a real good judgment. But regardless, like, I came away from watching Sato's tape and dissecting him as a fighter, thinking he's actually worse than I thought going in. And I didn't even have interest in backing him at plus 350 going into the week. So, man, I just think Takashi Sato is like very much not UFC level. He's pretty much a D- F level grappler. And I honestly think his striking is not that good. He's not going to win minutes against basically anyone in the UFC, considering how little he throws. So he's completely knockout or bust. Could he knock out Gunnar Nelson this weekend? Probably. But I think it's priced pretty accurately. Like, he probably has a 1 in 4 shot of doing so. So no action for me on this fight. Hopefully Gunnar Nelson just like goes out there, PK aside, hopefully he puts on a good performance and maybe we can fade him down the line a little bit because he is a guy kind of towards the back end of his career that we seem to both have some concerns with. But as far as this weekend goes, no action for me on that fight. No action for you either, John. Let's move on to the featured bout here on the main card. We got Paddy Pimblett, currently a minus 510 favorite. 9.4K on DraftKings against Kazula Vargas, who comes back plus 375. Does Vargas, I believe he's $6,800 on DraftKings. And honestly, I regret not betting Paddy the Batty at like minus 240 where this line opened. I had some interest, and then I was like, am I really going to bet this guy who's probably a hype machine to some extent, probably going to be overvalued by the market in the grand scheme of things, and had to go through fire against like Luigi Vendramini's UFC debut, and then once I got to this week and I saw minus 500, I was just like, how did I not lay the early price? I don't think Paddy the Batty is necessarily like a future world champ. I do think he probably gets a little bit too much shit for his first UFC performance. I mean, he went out there and stood, basically was like, I'll stand and bang with Luigi Vendramini. I do think he's, better if you go back and watch his tape. He's clearly like a grappler first. It's pretty decent jiu-jitsu, good when he gets on top. And this is a cakewalk of a matchup for him, man. I don't even think I'm discrediting Kazula Vargas. He's a guy who, against you wrong, like got outstruck by a ton, landed a few, I think, empty takedowns in that matchup. But he just does like very little, or I should say he outstruck him, but got taken down in that matchup. He just does very little that like inspires confidence. Kazula Vargas does to me. I don't think he has the upside to finish the fight, and I know he doesn't have the upside to win minutes in this matchup. So I expect Paddy Pimblett to kind of roll here, and then maybe we get a fade spot down the line with somebody a little bit more accomplished. But he's certainly getting the Sean O'Malley treatment in terms of the opponents here. So I don't think Rodrigo Vargas has anything for Paddy Pimblett this weekend. I'll take Pimblett. I think he wins in pretty easy fashion. John, any opinion for you in this feature bout on the main card?
Yeah, make no mistake about it. This was like a hand-picked matchup for Paddy Pimblett. And I mean, can you blame him? Like, the dude's coming off a big highlight reel, debut finish against Luigi Vendramini. I know that fight had its moments where it's like, oh, Paddy was hurt. But, you guys forget one thing. Scousers don't get knocked out. But that was a terrible accent, but I had to do it.
We got to clip that one.
I had to sneak it in there. But, I mean, I just think, like you said, like Paddy's better than Vargas pretty much wherever the fight goes. Like, I even think Paddy's striking looked better in the Vendramini matchup. And whereas Vendramini is low level, but he is a firecracker. Like, he does have power. I think Vendramini is a tougher matchup than Vargas, to be honest. So it's like, I don't really have any concerns here. I have Pimblett in like a super, like, I think it's a 9-leg parlay that I placed like back in January or something like that. So I do have him parlayed at like minus 290 in one of those. But outside of that, I don't have any action here. I considered betting Pimblett by submission at like plus 210. But I also think he could win by knockout here. If he gets on top, he could finish by ground and pound too. So I ended up not playing a prop. But I don't know. I can be talked into like a round one sub or something like that. I think it would probably have to be round one because you look at Pimblett's career. I mean, up and down his career, almost every single finish is within the first round. So I think he makes quick work of it. We'll see. But yeah, I say Pimblett rolls here.
Yeah, agreed there. No need to spend any more time on that. Let's move on to a firecracker of a matchup in the co-main event. We got Dan Hooker, currently a small underdog. He's minus 105, $8,200 against Arnold Allen, I should say, is minus 115, 8K flat for Arnold Allen on DraftKings. Really exciting matchup here. I actually got involved early on Dan Hooker. Let me quickly check what price I have. I believe it's plus 134 on Hooker. Yep, plus 134. I bet it on February 28th for a unit. And honestly, those where I just bet it pre-tape. Like I knew that Dan Hooker is like a plus 130, plus 125 underdog was just never going to stick around. It was on FanDuel. It was up at a bunch of sites. And it was one of those where I knew once people got around to taping this card on March 19th, it wasn't going to exist anymore. So I took a unit on Dan Hooker. And honestly, I think it was a pretty massive edge at the time. I just didn't want to bet more than a unit because I do have a little bit of concern with Dan Hooker cutting down to 145 for the first time in a few years. I think it's been a little bit overhyped on fight week, kind of how big a deal it is. It was something that was in the back of my head when I made the bet at the end of February. I will say he looks decent. I think I saw an Instagram clip of him on his story the other day, like 162. Seems on target. He's a professional. I expect Dan Hooker to make weight on Friday morning. Maybe he's a little bit depleted. He never had the best cardio in the world, not the most durable guy in general, but honestly, skill for skill. And I like Arnold Allen. I'll preface my breakdown by saying I like Arnold Allen, but I really just don't know how you don't make Dan Hooker anything other than a favorite in this matchup. Like, I just think he's the more diverse striker. Arnold Allen is solid at what he does, but Doesn't throw a ton of volume. I don't really think he's going to wrestle offensively here. In order to look like a favorite, I think that Arnold Allen is going to have to either land multiple knockdowns, get an early finish, or land multiple takedowns against Dan Hooker. And I just don't really think any of those things are overwhelmingly likely. Like, Dan Hooker is a guy who has a decent kicking range. His jiu-jitsu is solid, probably better than Arnold Allen's in my opinion. And he has those knees up the middle. I think the clinch is a massive spot that'll be an advantage for Hooker, in addition to just his general volume on the feet. Like, I just think he's going to be willing to do more. I think people give Allen a little bit too hard of a time for the fights like the Sadiq Youssef fight, where he was like outlanded but had a couple big moments with knockdowns. Like, I do think that Arnold Allen is a guy who is pretty skilled. I think he probably belongs in the top 10, top 15 of this weight class, but it's just a massive step up in competition against Dan Hooker, who's fought the who's who at 155. And I know it's a little bit different, but moving down in weight, I like Hooker still. I bet him at plus 134 for a unit. I'm probably going to add, as long as he looks fine on the scales, which I expect him to. He was at like minus 110. He's bounced back to a favorite. I think the best current number in the market is like a plus 105-ish offshore, maybe plus 107. See, Caesars has a plus 105 as well, just looking at the odds boards now. I think that's probably good. I'll probably add a half unit and look to get like a unit and a half, maybe even 2 units of exposure on Dan Hooker this weekend as an underdog. He's one of my favorite spots on the board. John, how do you feel here about the co-main event?
Yeah, I'm with you. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be in on Hooker. I had some concerns moving down to featherweight. Obviously in his last few fights, like, we've started to see that unhuman durability kind of, not be as good as it once was. We saw him finish in the Michael Chandler fight, finish in the Mokayev fight, but I'm not going to ding him too much for that one. That was just a terrible matchup for anybody in the division. But, you mentioned the main thing is, like, I think Hooker's, the diversity in his strikes is what's going to be big here, and the activity, because while Arnold Allen is super technical and pretty well-rounded, like, wherever the fight is taking place, he's also not, like, convincingly winning minutes. And that's always been my issue with him, is, like, even in the fights where he wins and you're like, yeah, that's probably an Arnold Allen round, it's like he's not putting stamps on rounds to the point where it's like, you continue to move up in competition. Like, his 8-0 streak in the UFC has been great, but, like, prior to the Sadiq Youssef fight, like, his best win was what, like, Nick Lentz? Like, he hasn't fought really anybody. And then even in the Youssef fight, he's really only won that fight because at the end of 2 of the rounds, he dropped Youssef. Outside of that, Youssef was winning that fight. So it's like, I still think Arnold is kind of being overvalued in terms of the betting market, but also just in the general consensus. I think people think he's better than what he is. I think he's a low volume guy who's pretty sound wherever the fight goes, but when he fights these upper level guys, I don't think he's going to be winning many fights in the elite, top 5, top 10 tier. And is Dan Hooker there at 145? I don't know. We'll see. Like you said, I think the weigh-ins are going to be important for Hooker. I know he still had like 17 pounds to go on Monday or whatever. So we'll see how he looks. We'll see if he seems okay, but I tend to lean with you, man. I think you got a good number on it. I think any plus money is probably good on Dan Hooker. I just think he's a better fighter pretty much wherever the fight goes. And then it's like, he's going to be doing more on the feet. If Allen tries to mix in the wrestling, Hooker historically has had pretty good takedown defense. So I just really don't see how Allen is, like, convincingly winning rounds against Dan Hooker. Maybe he surprises me, but I think plus money, you got to take the plunge on Dan Hooker.
Glad to hear you've come around on the Dan Hooker side this week. I thought I was going to be going into it as the only man with the bet on our show in the co-main event, but I'm glad it sounds like you've warmed to the idea. We'll see what weigh-ins look like. I'm not expecting it to have like a huge difference in my opinion, but basically we just want to avoid disaster on Friday morning. And then once I see that, Dan Hooker's going to look sucked out. He's a big frame for 155. Like, he's going to not look great on the scale, but as long as it's not a disaster of any sort, I think plus 105s are going to be pretty decent. I'm probably likely to take a half unit on the first one I see pop come Friday morning. Let's move on now to the main event, John, of UFC London. We got Tom Aspinall on his first main event in the UFC. He's a minus 130 favorite, $8,300 on DK against Alexander Volkov. Comes back plus 110, 7.9K. John, I will let you go first here for the main event. I feel like I've gone first a few times in a row for the main event. Big step up here for Tom Aspinall in terms of his career. But look, Alexander Volkov, a guy been around a hot minute, but is it Tom Aspinall's time to shine here in London, hometown? I believe he's from Manchester. Regardless, headlining a card in England, big spot for him in his career, and he takes on a veteran. And Alexander Volkov, what do you think of the fight?
Yeah, you would think the UFC is certainly setting up the kid, right? Like, he's going to have the crowd behind him. It's in London. He's obviously surging with a couple I think 3 UFC wins all within the first 2 rounds. But at the same time, like, and I've backed Aspinall in the past. Like, I bet him by knockout a couple times, I think. But I like him. It's just that I really have concerns here. And I don't know if it's like, I don't know. I don't feel good about it, to be honest. Like, seeing him as a favorite now against Alexander Volkov, who's much more proven over 15 minutes, who's much more proven against the elite tier of the heavyweight division. I think Volkov is probably going to be doing more over 15 minutes. Obviously, he's at risk to be finished in probably the first round, I'd say. But outside of that, like, we know Aspinall is going to slow down. The fights where it did go to the second round, he did slow down against who was it?
Well, he slowed down a little bit against Arlovsky.
Yeah,
a little bit.
Arlovsky. And then obviously got the takedown and ended up submitting him. But it's like, unless I know you're going to be mixing in the takedowns and the grappling against Volkov, like a Curtis Blades can do, or potentially Cyril Gane, even though he didn't really need to in that fight. But outside of that, like, and those are the guys that Volkov loses to. It's the elite guys, those two and Derek Lewis. Outside of that, nobody's beating him. So it's like, I think Aspinall either has to mix in the grappling, which I'm not sure he's going to do, or he has to finish early, because if this fight starts to go even 15 minutes, I think it really starts to favor Alexander Volkov. So I think people are kind of sleeping on Volkov here just because he didn't really have the best performance in his last couple of fights. But I think fighting a massive dude like Marcin Tybura, who is going to try to grapple you, and people get that bad taste in their mouth seeing him on his back so many times against these wrestlers, like the Curtis Blades fight, who took him down like 11 times or whatever it was. Like, I don't know, man. I think people are out overvaluing Tom Aspinall, and I like Aspinall. I'm rooting for Aspinall, but I might have a bet on Volkov come Saturday. I'm just waiting because it seems like everybody's backing Aspinall. I think you might be able to get a better number on Volkov. I know it's plus 110 now. I think that's fine for a unit, but if it goes even further, I'm definitely going to take the plunge on Alexander Volkov come Saturday.
Yeah, really strong breakdown there. Interesting. So I'll say one thing off the start here. I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't think I'm somebody who is overvaluing Tom Aspinall in general. I max bet him against Alain Baudot as a kind of a Baudot fade a while back, but I've actually bet against him in his last 2 matchups, and I've been wrong, really wrong in the Sergey Spivak fight. Like, he just got absolutely demolished. I don't think Sergey Spivak landed a strike in that matchup. But the Arlovsky fight, I got Arlovsky like a crazy number, ton of CLV. It was like plus 275. And I honestly thought that fight was shaping up to get a little bit, I don't want to say sketchy, but I thought that Aspinall was slowing down, which you kind of alluded to, John. I thought round 2, he had like a huge barrage of punches where it looked like Arlovsky wasn't really hurt and Aspinall was like hunting a finish. And then it looked like he was, hands on the hips after round 1, and then just gets a takedown, takes the back, and chokes out Andre Arlovsky, which I think people probably don't give him enough credit for. Is not something that, like, we've seen happen frequently throughout the UFC. But all that to say, regardless, I don't think I'm someone who's been as high on Tom Aspinall as even the market is. And I feel that way this week too, coming into it. I thought I'd have a bet on Volkov, and I've always loved Alexander Volkov. Like, I've always been a guy who's been ahead of the market on Alexander Volkov. I always thought higher of him than most other people did. I cashed tickets on him against Overeem, Walt Harris. Obviously, I didn't play him against Curtis Blades, but like, I've always been a Volkov guy. I didn't bet him against Cyril Gane in that matchup. I bet him against Tybura his last time out as well. So I think I bet Volkov a ton. I just didn't love the way he looked, honestly, against Tybura in that last time out. And you mentioned, he knew he was going to face a lot of takedown attempts. Clearly something he's cognizant of. And to his credit, he stuffed them all. But just like cardiovascularly and like the pace he was fighting at and just the speed, Volkov has never been like a fast guy at 265 pounds, especially now that he's bulking up more. But to me, it just didn't look like the same Alexander Volkov. And I know he's only 33 years old and at heavyweight, theoretically you can fight till whenever. But I don't know. Like, I just can't get the feeling watching that fight for the first time live out of my head where I had the bet on Volkov and I just felt so poorly about it in the middle of it. And rewatching it, he didn't look as bad as I thought he did when I watched it live. But at this point, like, the guy's got 43 professional fights. I think the most impressive thing about Volkov, which bodes very well for him this weekend, is 43 fights at heavyweight. He's fought in Bellator, the UFC, fought like a massively amazing strength of schedule. And he's only been knocked out twice. And one of those was with like 10 seconds left against Derek Lewis when he was dominating the fight prior to that. So like, historically, he's a very durable guy, which, like you mentioned, John, bodes well here. Like, we haven't seen Aspinall really pushed. I think of Aspinall's 11 wins, I have the stat in front of me, like 8 of them or something have come inside the first 90 seconds. Like, he's very untested when fights get extended. I worry a little bit about Alexander Volkov just in general. Like, I saw a tweet this week where it was like, is Tom Aspinall the real deal? Yes or no? And maybe it was our buddy Luke sparring with reality who put it out there. And like, My answer is no, but I also don't know if Alexander Volkov is value this weekend, which should be especially concerning to viewers who understand how good I've historically thought Volkov is. So my approach this weekend is maybe I'll live bet Volkov because I do think Aspinall's best round will be round one, regardless of how Volkov looks. And also, we get like 5 minutes of information. Like, was that an outlier fight against Tybura? Does Volkov look back to himself? And if I have to lay like minus 120, minus 130, I'd rather do that and have 5 minutes of information, knowing that Aspinall's best five are behind him and that Volkov is back to his old self, as opposed to, going out there. And I think I think Volkov is, I don't know if he's at risk to get knocked out because, like I said, it's always been a strength of his not to. I don't know. You can tell it's a fight I'm struggling with, but I'm not ready to say that like Alexander Volkov is still in prime form because a prime Volkov, I think, just goes out there and like absolutely stunts on Tom Aspinall however he wants. I just don't feel as confident as I thought I would be looking at this match once it was announced. So no action for me pre-flop. I think maybe a Volkov live bet is the best way to approach it. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the main event. John, if you have anything to add, feel free to do so. And if not, that's all 12 fights for UFC London. Take us out of here, my man.
Yeah, the only thing I did want to add about that is just the fact that, like, while I'm picking Volkov to win, I do think Aspinall clearly has more upside when it comes to DraftKings, just because, like, both of us kind of hit on it, is like, if this fight does end in round one, round two, I'd be willing to bet it comes from the Tom Aspinall side. So just keep that in mind when you're building lineups. 13 fight slate if we get the Wood replacement. So, I mean, it's still a decent amount of fights. Ownership's going to be more spread out like it has been these last couple weeks. So it should be a fun slate. Obviously, we have a couple betting spots that we talked about. If you're still listening, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I definitely appreciate it. If you're listening to us on iTunes, please give us a 5-star review. It is definitely appreciated as we try to grow our show. I'm John Kelly. That's Jonah Shiffman. This is the Undisputed MMA Show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck, and we will see you guys next time.